Josh, would you agree that Trumpism is with us to stay for the time being? And do you have any prognostications about what we might see from Trump himself over the
Yeah,
next few years?
well, yeah, I agree with almost everything Lisa said. That there's, especially on the Trumpism side of things. But the question is, how do you define Trumpism, right? I mean, you ask 10 different Republicans, and they have a different view of what Trump stands for. Is it nationalism? Is it trade, immigration, just owning the liberals? Like, well, what does Trumpism mean? To me, a lot of the Trump vote, from my reporting and just looking at the data, suggests that some of it is negative polarization. Some of it is, I don't love Trump's personal behavior, but boy, he owns. When he talks about cancel culture, I'm with him. I hate that even more. So there is some of that, the owning the libs, political incorrectness type of appeal that Trump has. That I don't know if it's translatable as much to other Republicans. One of the more interesting questions in the exit poll was when voters were asked whether if Biden won the election, would they be more disappointed or angry? And you actually saw an even 50% divide between people who would be disappointed and people who would be angry if Biden won. And you saw the 50% in Washington yesterday at the MAGA march. But there is, this unstable coalition that both parties are dealing with, but you can see it on the Republican side pretty clearly, where you've got the Trumpism, the Trumpist side of the party, which is much more populist, depends on support from these new voters, working class, blue collar voters. But you still have the old school, traditional conservatives that Mitch McConnell represents, appointing judges, tax cuts. The donors that give to the Republican Party aren't exactly Trumpists. So Republicans are dealing with this weird, unstable coalition between the establishment, if you will, and the Trumpists. And the Democrats are dealing with a pretty unstable coalition of progressives and more pragmatists, the more suburban voters that have come into the party. So we're in a very volatile time in our politics. I mean, the $64,000 question, as Lisa, really made all the right points on. What does Trump do out of office, and does being in power dramatically change his hold with the base in a way that not having power will? Mm-hmm. I'm sort of in. I mean, I don't have anyone who knows Trump's psychology knows how unpredictable he is, and anyone making any firm prediction is going to be off base. But I think it is fair to say that once he doesn't have power, I mean, a lot of these Republicans are kind of humoring him because they want to win either the Georgia Senate runoff coming up in a month, and they don't want to split the party before then, or they have things that they want to accomplish, like perhaps Lindsey Graham is sucking up to Trump because he doesn't want him to withdraw troops from Afghanistan, from Iraq in the final 2 months of his administration. So there is some realpolitik that's taking place with some of these Republicans because he's still in power. He can still do things that may be against their own personal interests. So there's no doubt Trump is still going to have a hold on his base. I think it's kind of like, anyone who watched The Apprentice, it's the difference between The Apprentice season 2 and The Celebrity Apprentice that came out, when the ratings were going down and only the diehards were watching that show. He's going to have a hold on a decent segment of the party. The question is, what is that percentage? I think it's very possible that's under half the party. In fact, I think the exit poll suggests that it's about a 50-50 split right now between the Trumpists and the establishment. And I also think that Biden, if he's successful as president, if he's skillful and pick off, can divide, the parties that are divided are the ones that end up losing these political fights. So if Biden is able to introduce legislation that it's hard for the Republican lawmakers in the Senate to oppose, especially on some of this non-ideological stuff, he could really, gain the upper hand politically. I think the president just dominates Washington in terms of who has the upper hand politically. And if Biden is, adroit in kind of picking issues that can have bipartisan appeal, I think he could put a lot of pressure on that 50% of the Republican coalition that's more traditional, that isn't quite as enamored with the president himself.
Okay, good. Well, I think we've got a really good foundation here. So I want to turn to the Jewish angle in all of this. The question of how American Jews voted this year depends on whom you ask. But clearly more Jews than not remain loyal to the Democratic Party, with an Associated Press survey finding that 68% of Jews voted for Biden and 30% for Trump. President Trump has delivered on a number of initiatives that even some Jews who didn't vote for him support, like recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital or new sanctions on Iran. It remains to be seen how President-elect Biden will shift course or not on these and other issues. But what has this election taught us about Jewish expectations and Jewish priorities in 2020? Josh, you want to go first?
Well, I'll start off with the politics, and I will say, maybe I'll say at the outset, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of significant change, frankly, because Biden, his record suggests he's got a pretty traditional pro-Israel record. He's talked about, getting back into the Iran nuclear deal, but with the news over the last week about Iran harboring, the Al-Qaeda #2, that's going to be hard to just, make kumbaya with Iran, given the realities on the ground. So, I think Biden is from the wing of the Democratic Party that really, is in sync with the broad constituency in the Jewish community. As far as the politics go within the Jewish community, we all always talk a lot about like the religion and religiosity really being one of the big political divides. That if I can tell you how many times you go to services a week or a month, that is almost as good a predictor as any in figuring out who you voted for in the last election. And for the Jewish community, that wasn't always the case. Most Jews voted Democrat, but there wasn't a huge denominational split until more recently, maybe in the last 8 to 10 years. And now there is a significant partisan split based on Jewish denomination. That we're still looking at the data. There are exit polls that you referenced, Eric, and you can also look at some of the key House races and precinct by precinct data. But there's a lot of evidence that more Orthodox voters swung pretty dramatically to Trump in this election. You look at Florida, the Fox AP poll showed about 40% of Jews voted for Trump, which is a big jump from previous elections. And you look at certain precincts where you have a high concentration of either modern Orthodox or more Haredi Orthodox voters, and there was a clear swing towards the Republicans and to President Trump. So you are seeing, we're talking about polarization, tribalism. We were even seeing within communities, right? We're seeing communities that were once united, perhaps more united on the broader politics, are now seeing the tribalism even seep internally. And certainly the religiosity is one of the best sort of differentiators across the board, but also within the Jewish community and how someone viewed this presidential election.